Hello, and welcome to the November 8th weekly JupyterLab call. Let me change the orientation of Zoom. There we go. There are 10 people on the call. I'm not going to express disappointment more than this much disappointment. I'm going to express this much, but still. That's all right. The 10 of you are most welcome, or I guess the 9 of you, I'm counting myself there. And let's see. So on the agenda, we have Eric and Fred. So if you have something to say, today is a good day. But with that, why don't we get started with Eric?
Cool. So I had a couple of points related to just the Jupyter developer experience. So I guess kind of the top line item here is like, what should our new maintainer pipeline be like? And I don't know like what the thinking is around this right now. But I've had some conversations with people that make me really think about what's the answer to this question, right? So like for me, and I'll put myself on the spot here by saying that I had like prior to this working on Jupyter, I had a lot of like desktop application and backend experience, but I had very little experience as a web developer. So I think, given the complexity of the tech stack and the complexity of the CI, given how many dependencies there are, and then for a new contributor, me or anyone else, right? Like the difficulty when you do a piece of work, there's the difficulty of getting that piece of work through these often undocumented or partially documented CI processes. So each one of these checks, right, has many tools, each has their own configuration. And I personally, I get the feeling sometimes like I'm reminded of this definition here is marked by a senseless, disorienting, often menacing complexity. So that's how I feel sometimes. And I think, like, I don't have, like, I don't know how to measure it, right? How do we measure the number of people who don't come in because of this? How many people do we lose, or how many PRs do we lose, or potential work do we lose because of kind of the difficulty of some of these processes? Yeah. So any thoughts here?
I mean, my raised hand actually should go down. Anyone else want to talk before me?
I really appreciate you bringing this up, Eric, because just yesterday we were talking about this in the diversity, equity, and inclusion group, the DEI group. This is something that we've been talking a lot about among ourselves. So if you haven't already, I would recommend reaching out. I can share our email address, because we are trying to include underrepresented people or underrepresented groups who might
Yes.
feel intimidated by the process, or worried about doing the wrong thing.
Yeah, exactly. And I think like I think ostensibly we all care about being accessible, right? And including as many people as possible. But I think like some of these processes make it really, really difficult to include people. And Jupyter, I think the Jupyter community is full of really smart people.
Yeah.
But not all of them are veteran web developers.
So something that I've talked about before, and I'll mention again on the record, is I just dropped in the Jupyter community page into the chat, which is, with all due respect, a very well-intended document designed by committee, because this is a very lengthy document that includes a lot of avenues to engage with the community, but there's no guide, there's no tutorial, there's no getting started page to say, hey, I want to contribute to Jupyter. Where do I get started?
Yeah.
Mike's got his hand up.
Yeah, so I have one very specific thought about what we can do, and that is trying to make incremental progress. I don't feel that there is a single solution. What I think is important is to look at what other big projects do. And there is one very specific other IDE which includes notebooks, which is using very similar stack and has even more complex CI, even more complex tech stack. The difference there is that it's supported by a single company, which can afford to put endless stream of
Resources.
money
Yeah.
into documenting and enhancing the developer experience. Jupyter as such is very widespread and getting across different use cases, so it's difficult. But there are organizations which deal with complex code bases in open source space, such as Mozilla, which, or even the Python itself, which have very interesting second layers of documentation to help newcomers. They often include a mention that, look, this is our contributing guide, but don't read it all. It's trying to be comprehensive, but you will be scared by reading it all. So just read the piece that you need. And if you have any question, go ask in this channel. We'll try to point you to the relevant places. Things like that, like trying to enable people to not be afraid to ask any question. Yeah.
Anyone else?
Thanks for bringing this up, Eric.
Yeah, sure.
We've been talking about it for years, and I can only imagine it's gotten worse. However, I would like to raise caution here, right? When we think about diversity, we think about some quantity of people that aren't represented in the group right now. But we have to ask ourselves, how selfish is the desire to onboard somebody and provide them with onboarding support and then not provide them with support when they're onboarded? So we've done this a few times, and I think that a few times I've seen, maybe there's been a few successful scenarios, not as sure of those things, but I do focus on the people who aren't around more. And when I've seen diverse people brought in through, say, Google Summer of Code or Outreachy, they are really mired in the complexity, right? Yeah. So the support there, and to Mike's point, I think Mike is really talking about there's a lot of support for VS Code, and we have dwindling support. Mm-hmm. So right now, this is, yes, I agree with you that this is important, but I think that there's more of a foundational structural thing that needs to be answered. The DEI community, the DEI committee and the community committee, they're planning on doing things, but right now we really need some action that's gonna like carve the way for what the future of this looks like. But I really think the complexity is neglecting a lot of people that could find identity in Jupyter. But again, it's a multi-year problem. Yeah. And we've neglected it. And that means that there's a lot of complexities in this, and it's going to take a bigger effort than like weekly meetings, and it might be a workshop kind of deal, right? And I know Darian has been getting prickly about complexity the past couple weeks too. So maybe it's like a time for us to all come together and figure out what a plan for this looks like, so we can support people. But until we can support ourselves, we can't support new people. So I really want to caution about being overzealous in bringing people on when we don't have the ability to support them, because that's a bigger failure than not bringing somebody on.
Right. To your point, right, I think like a lot of the knowledge and expertise is here, but maybe if we had better formalized structures for getting people help or connecting people with expertise, I think that would go a long way.
I agree, but I think it's going to take somebody who, coming from the outside like yourself, right? Like your perspective from the outside is really important, we need more perspectives from the outside, right? Like right now, we're trying to get a user to contribute, or we're trying to get a person to contributor pipeline. But most of the people on this project, and most of the reason this project was developed historically, was because this project met the needs of the people working on it, right?
Yeah.
So one of the things that we don't have is we don't have the capability of onboarding and introducing new people into this complexity in a way that might give them the success, right? Because this extension ecosystem is novel. It's really hard to understand the fluidity of it, right? But if you are using an extension and you want to improve, the extension ecosystem might be the friendliest place. But right now, I wonder if some of the governance structure is going to make it hard for Jupyter Core to be able to do this.
Yeah, I mean, at the risk of oversimplifying, I see a couple of styles of communication coming in especially when I do triage each week. One is that people have a problem and they just want like support. They want to get things working. Another is people have found a relatively minor bug or enhancement request that they could even do themselves if we just pointed them in the right direction. And then occasionally we get people who are big idea people. They have a big vision for what they want to build Jupyter into, but they don't really have the support of the community yet. And that's where things get a bit dicey because, we can't really, that requires a lot more influence. But I think among the first two groups, we try, now that we have the weekly triage, we at least interact with all of these new issues coming in, but that's not necessarily the first point of contact for everyone, right? Not everyone is going to start by filing things in GitHub. Some people just want to come to a meeting or email a list or join a Reddit community. We have a lot of avenues, but I don't know if we're monitoring them enough and supporting them enough.
I've jotted down a couple of notes from different people. If you can, anyone please drop suggestions on that bullet point there, because a lot of good stuff.
I want to take a moment as a group and shout out all the people who do support, all the people answering questions on Discourse and stuff like that. Good for thank you all for making sure that people contact us, right? Because like Jason said, it spreads so wide with Discourse and GitHub and all that stuff. So thank you all for making that experience better. We do got to find some way to bring some more people in who are closer to that transition, though.
Part of the understanding with triage is that it establishes an informal contract of if you file a new bug or enhancement against JupyterLab, Jupyter Notebook, or Lab Desktop, we will look at it within a week. And we have generally kept to that, even if it's, say, a duplicate, we'll close it out. If we don't know what you're talking about, we'll ask you for clarification. We don't have that kind of contract on all of the avenues we list on our community page.
And then I guess I've got a couple of other partial suggestions or solutions maybe. I know that so Blender is another big open source project, and they have this concept of module owners. So these are like different people who lead the development on a particular area of the code base. And I think there's potentially, it's an interesting concept, and it's kind of maybe a natural point for like mentorship to flow out of that. And then I guess separately, so there's module owners, and then I also have separately just a note about that, like Google Summer of Code style mentorship. So I don't know how people feel about those two concepts, but certainly, like for anyone who's not familiar, Google pays students to work on open source projects, and Blender does this, I think, every year. And a student will come on, they say, I want to do this feature, and then they'll be assigned a mentor who can then kind of shepherd them through that process. So those are two kind of just. Some
companies in the ecosystem already have stuff like this, and they're probably more aligned for paying folks, right?
Well,
like
not
one of the
paying.
things.
I think in particular, I don't mean necessarily funding people, but I mean the concept of just assigning someone a mentor and having them shepherd them through the process.
I get that. But we do live in an environment where people need to get paid. So that's like one of the things that we like from an accessibility perspective, you know, we've really been pushing that everybody who contributes should find a way to get paid in this. But you know, some like we've brought up Google Summer of Code whenever it comes up, and sometimes we've gone for it and sometimes we haven't, right? So is that something that the EC or somebody can support in making sure that we're consistent about being good Google Summer of Code mentors and stuff like that?
I'm not speaking on behalf of the EC, but I don't imagine the EC would say yes to this because Google Summer of Code is about a specific project and it would have to basically be that sub-project wanting to do it. You can't like say, no, the boss says do it, right? Like JupyterLab as a project could say, we as a sub-project have this policy where every year we're going to do it because we can kind of like, we can gauge how much this community can you know, like how much workload we can tolerate. But the EC can't really say that to JupyterLab. I think we'd be annoyed if they did.
Right.
I have a couple suggestions that address some small portions of this. I think we're talking about such a large problem that it seems intractable. But for example, suppose we have in our repo a label quality of life, and we start creating some quality of life issues. For example, the thing that really hurts, and Fred knows all about this and has tried to address it, but he's not the only one, is when my PRs fail, there's one line of text somewhere in those logs, and there's a bunch of zip files somewhere in that job that can answer the question of why. Sometimes it's because I moved something over by 2 pixels because I changed the CSS. And if I could only see that diff, I could fix it, but I have no idea how to find it, right? So imagine we write an issue that says quality of life. Can we fix CI jobs so that unless they return some human readable thing, we no longer add them to our CI? The ones that are currently there, we can file individual issues and say, hey, the Linux tests jobs don't do a good job of coming back. But at least going forward, we can say part of the minimum viable new CI task is this human readable answer, for example.
Yeah.
Another example of quality of life issue might be like, imagine an issue comes in to triage, right? And a bot answers and a bot says, hey, if you want to work on this issue, but you just need a little help getting started, just thumbs up this comment and we will ping the JupyterLab team to say, hey, if anyone wants to give this person a hint, please do just add a hint to this, right? So that maybe that helps somebody get started, not just make a complaint. Or maybe somebody reads that complaint and they want to get started and they ask for the hint on that same GitHub issue that they found by searching for it or something. Like, I think we can add little bits to address what's currently wrong, address some of those as quality of life issues, but that's only a small subset of what you're talking about, Eric.
No, I just took a couple of notes. That's really good stuff.
It's a bunch of different kinds of events because our surface area of users is so big. We just like that's one of the biggest problems with this one is the user space is so large.
Yeah. You know, and speaking of don't add things to the CI if they're not human readable. I'm going to take a note real quick about that. But I just had spoken with Nick earlier about the idea of settling on a particular build process, recording that in a document somewhere, and then when people want to make changes to the build processes or the CI, that we go through a workflow so that we have an updated document for that, because this is I think this is in particular is it's so complex and it's so painful, and it's the source of so much spent time for me, certainly.
So do you have a specific examples? Because it really helps if we could like see an issue and try to address that. I would be happy to find time to do that.
Yeah.
But if we don't see these issues come up, that's something that I mentioned previously. It's just difficult to, you know, to address them. I know that CI is a pain, but it's probably a different kind of pain for me than for you.
So yeah, for sure. And so I think just more broadly, I wonder if we can formalize the process of modifying the CI, I suppose, instead of just merging things in. And maybe if we could develop a different formalized process for making changes, then maybe we can ensure that they're always documented for people who are going to have to go through these processes.
I'm wondering if there's not a mashup here of some stuff that was talked about earlier. Like Jason has been running the triage event, and the consistency that you've been doing it in, Jason, is remarkable. Bless you for that.
Yes.
But you know, I don't like, and good on the developers who get a chance to go and contribute. But I think like I've seen y'all get more excited about talking about popular pull requests or popular issues or things that have a lot of comments on them rather than the new stuff. So is there a way to kind of like flip the triage format that we use, like if there's time left over on triage day or if there's time left over for triage in JupyterLab, we focus on things that get y'all stoked, right? Because like the new issues, it's kind of like death by 1,000 paper cuts. But what are the big things that y'all need to deal with? Maybe this is a good time to potentially triage those or something.
Yeah, I think it's terrific. Well, first of all, thank you for the kind words about triage, Tony. I mean, you you were the one who originally led that, so I'd be remiss. I want to give you credit as well. And for those of you who want to join, we meet every Tuesday morning Pacific time. It's tricky sometimes because we're looking at individual issues, but we also want to try to divine common threads here, where if people are commonly running into problems, like something my team works on Jupyter AI, for example, which is an official Jupyter sub-project, and we've seen a few things come up where people are trying to use it with Jupyter Hub, and each individual issue is phrased in the way of like, I can't do this, can you help me? But this is a macro issue that it's not working with with Hub, and so we need to do a bigger project to make it work with this bigger official sub project. And we see this sometimes with Jupyter Notebook, because Jupyter Notebook is somewhat confusing as a repo in that Jupyter Notebook capital N is a product. Jupyter Notebook small n is a file format. So we get a fair amount of issues that are about using a small n notebook with like VS Code or Colab or something else entirely. So trying to suss out how people are trying unsuccessfully to use Jupyter, that's one indicator.
By the way, that particular point of confusion we're trying to address right now in a What is Jupyter guide for the docs working group.
Excellent.
And I cannot tell you how many times I hear that same piece of feedback from so many different places.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Jupyter as a project, has a lot of different aspects to it. So just, defining what is Jupyter, I do that every time I talk about Jupyter. I've like describing what it is in 30, 60, 90 seconds, depending on how much time I have. But, to Tony's point, like I've worked on commercial products where we literally pay people to do user testing, where we have them sit down with either a real or a paper prototype, and we have them walk through use cases, and we record audio and video and observe where they run into problems, or if they click or press a button that they believe does A but really does B. These sorts of things are, you know, speaking from my own company's perspective, not very expensive and very enlightening. And I wonder whether we've ever considered doing something like that for Jupyter.
The Notebooks for All project has done it this year.
Nice.
We have been paying blind and visually impaired developers to test our product. And it took a while for us to actually get to that place and have people realize that testers should be paid. But we are doing that. There are designers that have been doing that. They've been doing that low key for a while. And more support for that would be absolutely huge, right? Like, we used an incredibly small grant and sacrificed our own compensation so that other people are getting paid, right? But that doesn't really, like, logically, that doesn't seem to make sense for the individuals. But something along those lines would be super duper powerful. And I don't know how that works. We don't have a history of paying folks.
I mean, that is something you can take to the EC. You can say, hey, we need funds to do this thing as a sub-project, and the EC can say, cool, like that's a different thing, right? That we, depending on whether we actually as a project have the money and can afford it. Yeah.
Yeah. To give an idea of budget, what I've observed, based on my experience, is spending on the order of about $100 US for a few hours of the person's time, and doing that about 8 times provides significant information, not statistically significant results. We're not looking for numbers with a small sigma here. We're looking for a small but representative sample of users. And the word representative is challenging, right? Because we got people around the world in every industry you can imagine, with every background you can imagine, using a Jupyter notebook. But, you know, 8 is better than none. And sorry, I shouldn't say it's been none, but getting more data is better than less.
Mike raises an important point in the chat, that when we have done this, we have not always actually acted upon the data we've collected.
Because, back to Eric's point, the complexity. That's always been our challenge, like with this, is at least in accessibility, right? The distance that source code has to travel to become HTML determines how, like, complicated it is, right? So the more build steps you have, the more complicated this accessibility stuff is. And for us, a lot of the things that are UI UX things that we found, they were common because of the complexity. There was a lot of common complexity across packages that make it hard. We're making a dent in it now, right? But, like, what it turns out is you actually need somebody who's completely dedicated to writing specifications, and they are not going to get acknowledged for their software work, right? They're going to be busy on issues and pull requests and stuff like that. But you really, like, writing specifications for Jupyter right now is really complicated because of the complexity. So it kind of comes full circle, I think. So maybe there's a way to, like, do community pushes where we tackle some complexity in a specific place and it's really isolated or something. But yeah, good point, Mike.
I'm probably going to try to maybe work up some issues from these, but I'll probably try to revisit some of this stuff, just so that I can, we can really capture what we're saying here and put some action to it. I want to try to breeze through these last 2 points because I had a couple other things. Sorry for taking so much time here. But I just thought it would be good to mention, I think I don't know if someone said it in this meeting, but there's a lot of tribal knowledge in the Jupyter ecosystem. And I think, right, like, the goal should be get that expertise from the people who have it and record it somewhere. So the docs working group is kind of is planning to do like these moots. So this is the plan for these is to convene schedule a meeting with some docs working group folks and some people who have expertise so that we can record that. So the plan is to do that for a bunch of different topics, but just a quick note about that. I know the expertise is here in a lot of your guys' heads. So definitely we want to record that, and that's kind of the early plan here. And then one more thing was just, I don't know what I'm not sure what the consensus is around how we should use the Jupyter.org documentation site. I know part of it right now, it's partially about the overall Jupyter project, and it has a little bit of contributor information. But given some of the discussions we have in the docs working group, I think that it could really be a good place for recording a lot of this project-wide information for contributors so that it becomes a very valuable repository of how do I do X in Project Jupyter, stuff that's relevant to multiple projects or to the meta project. So I think I was wondering if you guys have thoughts on that, and then you know, if this is something that people agree with, definitely I think there's work we can do to do some refactors and expanding the docs that are there.
So I have 2 points which are potentially carryover from previous discussion, but one of the pieces of potentially tribal knowledge which I myself do not really understand is, for example, how funding works. And in Jupyter, if we wanted to have some user testing or have some dedicated design or whatever work funded from Jupyter, how we would go about that. And this varies across sub-projects. I recently found by chance that on Jupyter Hub Team Compass, there is a link explaining how you can apply for reimbursement within Jupyter Hub. And someone asked me, like, how is Jupyter funded? I had no idea how to answer that. I had some idea. I can explain like maybe 3 or 4 branches of how it works, but for the most part, I don't really understand this. And there is a potentially related suggestion that when you are looking to aggregate useful information for contributors or potential contributors, and not only users in your documentation, revamp, the team compasses can be hugely valuable resource. So it's just to not only look at the documentations of specific sub-projects, but the team compass repositories might also provide some useful feedback.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Sorry, I just want to go back to previous discussion and say that it's not all that gloomy, and that we in JupyterLab, like with every release, have at least recently at least 1 new contributor, and sometimes it's maybe even 5. So there are pull requests getting merged for people who are first-time contributors who might have had some experience in web dev or general programming, but were not necessarily ever contributing to any of other Jupyter projects. So I think it's not that bad, but then probably we should ask them, maybe we should ask them about their experience and what was hard, what was good.
Yeah, those are great points. Thanks, Mike. Oh, and related note, Darianne, I tried to record Mike's point about how does funding work is a great example, but I have that other PR in for how do you get access to Jupyter accounts for like the blog if you need to make a blog post. There's a PR for that if you have any time to look at it and see if it looks good.
Cool. Okay. I was going to say this has been a really good conversation, and it's a good thing that we've got so much of it in the notes to follow up on. I mean, there are individual issues linked here. Would you say someone who wants to keep working on this set of issues should come to the docs working group, or like what is a thing, an outcome of this conversation to the people who maybe just started thinking about it today?
That's a great idea, actually. We should have we can maybe have a running initiative for developer experience. So yeah, I think that would be a good idea, actually.
Cool. Okay. There was also Fred on the agenda. I don't know, should we leave this topic? Is there more to discuss, do you think? Has anyone been holding on to some thought?
It's just an announcement, so no pressure.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. Okay, well, Fred, make your announcement.
It's just to remind the council member that there is still 1 week for checking your membership in the ad hoc issue. I will send an email to the mailing list as it's only for people that are members of the council. And so deadline is in a week, and just after that's done, I will set up the new rights, meaning that people that are part of the release team, they may expect to receive invitation to the Jupyter organization on PyPy, so that we'll be able to manage the rights of people through the PyPy organization in PyPy. And yeah, that's going to be the follow-up. And also, as soon as the new council members are established, we'll start for the process of electing a new software steering council representative. So yeah, that's going to be a 2-phase period. One that are the first phase will be for people to present themselves as candidate, and then we're gonna have an election for the representative. The idea, schedule is a bit tight, but the idea is to have the new representative by the end of this year, so that we can do the switch between me and the new representative in January. That's what for me.
Cool. Thank you, Fred. I guess this is a good time to also say, be on the lookout really soon. I'll be sending a message to all of the projects to remind people that we have annual EC elections, and this year there's one open seat that is filled by the union of councils as members of every sub-project councils, and there are 2 seats that will be voted on by the current EC, because last year there was 2 that were voted on by the committee and 1 by the EC, so it alternates each year. And each year, 3 members of the EC, so half the EC, are up for election. So this year that means, sorry, yeah, that's right. This year that means that the term of Jason Grout and Steve Sylvester and Anna Ruvalcaba ends at the end of this year. And we will have an election, and one of those seats will be the outcome of that election, and it'll be a ranked choice election, just like before. And 2 of the remaining seats will be voted on by the AC. And I'll come back with much more info and links, etc. But if you are thinking about running for AC, cool, great. And if you aren't thinking about it, well, now you're thinking about it because I said those words and a thought formed in your brains. You might not have taken that thought seriously, but you have thought about it. So well done. Cool. Okay, we have 15 minutes left. How shall we use the 15 minutes? Are there perhaps 4.1 triage things that we left last week that we can take up this week? I don't remember where we, or maybe I wasn't here last week. I'm not sure. Or is there anything anyone else would like to talk about? Okay, cool. Then I will stop the recording and maybe we can figure out whether we want to triage or not. So brace yourselves.